Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty iconic this time around, Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007.
Yeah, this one, talk about taking a classic and making it your own. It's definitely a unique take on the Michael Myers story.
For sure, and we've got some great articles and analyses to dig into, really get a sense of what Zombie was going for with this reimagining, you know.
It's going to be interesting to see how his vision lines up with, or maybe clashes with,
Yeah.
the original. But that's what we're here for, right?
Exactly, we're going deep, so let's not waste any time. Big question right off the bat. Is Michael Myers pure evil, or did something make him that way?
Ooh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Zombie seems to really want to explore that. He doesn't shy away from the psychology behind the mask.
Yeah, you see that right from the start, too. The way he structures the film, almost like two halves, before and after, if you will.
Right. You get that deep dive into Michael's childhood, which is something the original didn't really touch on. We see him as this force of nature. But Zombie wants to show us the origins of that force.
And it's not a pretty picture, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. We're talking serious dysfunction, abusive stepfather, neglectful mother, kids at school tormenting him. It's brutal.
It makes you think about the impact of that kind of upbringing, right? How much of who we are is nature versus nurture.
And Zombie lays it out so clearly. He contrasts Michael's horrific childhood with Laurie Strode's relatively stable, loving family. It's like he's setting up this experiment playing out in the most terrifying way possible.
But he's not just trying to shock us, is he? There's more to it than that.
I think he's trying to get at something deeper. By giving Michael this backstory, he's not condoning the violence, but he's trying to give us some context.
Yeah. So we can maybe understand how someone becomes a monster.
Right, and that's what makes it so interesting. Does knowing why Michael does what he does make him any less scary?
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of the boogeyman. Do we find something more human underneath? Or something even more horrifying?
And that's where the debate comes in. Some people say that by explaining Michael, Zombie actually takes away some of the fear, that mystery is gone. And that's what made the original so effective.
So the unknown is scarier than the known.
In a way.
Yeah.
But others find this psychological exploration really compelling. Makes the violence even more disturbing, because we see the twisted path that led there. The way the abuse he suffered is mirrored in his own brutality.
Oh man, there's that one scene when Michael's carefully making his mask as a kid. Almost ritualistic.
Exactly. It's like violence isn't just rage for him. It's an art form in a twisted way, something born out of his trauma.
And Zombie style really reinforces that. The whole film has this raw, visceral feel. It's not subtle at all.
Yeah, he goes for that grindhouse aesthetic.
Yeah.
Gritty visuals, unflinching violence. He wants the audience to be uncomfortable to experience the ugliness of Michael's world firsthand.
It's definitely effective. I mean, you can't watch this and not feel the weight of that violence.
Yeah.
The darkness that permeates everything.
And it makes you question things. Is Zombie trying to make us more afraid by understanding the origins of Michael's violence? Or is he showing us this cycle of brutality as something to be afraid of in itself?
Man, that's a good question. And then there's the whole sibling twist.
Oh, yeah. We find out Laurie Strode is actually Michael's sister. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
It throws a whole other wrench in the nature versus nurture debate. Are they both predisposed to darkness because of their shared genes? Or is Laurie proof that environment plays a bigger role?
I mean, you have to wonder, if Laurie had been the one trapped in that nightmare of a childhood, would she have become another Michael?
It's definitely a thought-provoking element. Adds this whole layer of fatalistic dread to the film. The idea that some evils might be inescapable.
But even if you escape the trauma, it still might find a way to catch up with you.
And that's where Zombie leaves us hanging for now. But before we get too deep into all that, let's talk about some of the visuals, starting with that iconic mask.
Oh, yeah. It's not just a mask in this one. It's a statement.
It's different, dirtier, more weathered, like it's been through hell and back.
It's like a reflection of Michael's own psyche, all fractured and broken. And there's that scene where he digs it out of a box in the attic.
It's not just a prop. It's like he's putting on a uniform.
It's a transformation.
Yeah.
He's not just a troubled kid anymore. He's becoming the embodiment of terror. And Tyler Maines as Michael, the dude is huge EE.
Yeah, he really brings that physicality to the role. You get a sense of Michael's raw power, like he's an unstoppable force.
Zombie definitely wanted to make him seem almost inhuman, like you're completely powerless against him.
So we've got this brutal backstory, this intense visceral style, and a Michael Myers that's both familiar and totally different. It's a lot to unpack.
We've only scratched the surface. There's still so much to dive into. Especially how Zombie reimagines Laurie Strode and the impact of that sibling revelation. But we'll get into all that after a quick break.
Yeah.
It's interesting how Zombie tackles this whole idea of the slasher villain. He doesn't keep Michael shrouded in mystery. Instead, he pulls back the curtain and shows us what shaped him, the forces that created this monster.
Yeah, it's like he's inviting us to look beyond the mask, see if there's any humanity left underneath.
Exactly. And by doing that, he raises the question, does explaining the monster make it less scary? Some people criticize the film for that. They say by giving Michael this elaborate backstory, he's taking away the mystery, that primal terror that made the original so effective.
Right, like the old saying, we fear what we don't understand, but sometimes understanding something can make it even more frightening.
Totally. Think about it. In the original Michael's, this force of nature, this unknowable evil that just appears. But Zombie shows us the roots of that evil planted in his childhood. We see the abuse, the neglect, the bullying that twisted him. And honestly, that's unsettling on a whole other level.
It's almost like he's saying the scariest monsters aren't born, they're made. And what's even more disturbing is that the things that made Michael, the cruelty, the violence, those things exist in our world every day.
Exactly. And Zombie doesn't shy away from showing us that ugliness. We see Michael torturing animals, obsessed with death, even as a young kid. And then there's that scene where he kills the bully. It's brutal. But it also reveals how violence has become his language, his way of dealing with the world.
Yeah, that scene is tough to watch. But it makes you think about how abuse can become cyclical. Michael is both a victim and a perpetrator.
Right. It highlights that Zombie's not just going for cheap scares. He's exploring the dark side of human nature, the potential for violence that's in all of us. And he uses the whole grindhouse aesthetic to really hammer that home.
Can you talk a little more about the whole grindhouse thing? Some people might not be familiar with that term.
Sure, grindhouse refers to this style of filmmaking that came up in the 70s.
Yeah.
Low-budget, gritty visuals, lots of exploitation and violence. It's raw, visceral, unsettling, intentional.
So Zombie's using that style to make the audience feel uncomfortable, to mirror that brutality in Michael's world.
Exactly. He wants us to feel the weight of that violence, experience that darkness that's just everywhere in the film. And it definitely works. It's so different from Carpenter's original, which relied more on atmosphere and suspense.
It's interesting how that stylistic difference plays into the nature versus nurture debate, too. Carpenter's Michael is this supernatural evil, but Zombie's Michael is very much a product of his environment,
Right.
a broken human being turned monster.
It really reflects how horror has evolved. Back when Carpenter made the original slasher films were just starting, there was this mystique to the silent killer. But Zombies film came decades later. Audiences were ready to explore the psychology, the factors that create these monsters.
It's like we've shifted from fearing the unknown to fearing the known, the darkness that exists within ourselves and in our society.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And that's why Zombies film is so powerful. It's a remake, but it offers a fresh perspective on the whole Halloween mythos, one that really resonates with modern audiences.
Okay, so we've covered Michael's backstory, the grindhouse aesthetic, the themes of violence and abuse. But what about that mask? It's so iconic.
Yeah, the mask. It's central to the Halloween franchise. But Zombie uses it in a way that reinforces the film's message. It's not the pristine, emotionless mask from the original.
Right. It's dirtier, weathered, like it's carrying the weight of Michael's trauma.
And remember, when he gets it out of the box in the attic, it's not just him grabbing a prop. It's a ritual, a transformation.
Yeah.
He puts on the mask and becomes the embodiment of all that rage, all that pain, all that darkness inside him.
And casting Tyler Mane as Michael really adds to that. He's huge EE, way more physically imposing than any other Michael Myers.
That was a deliberate choice, too. Zombie wanted to create this sense of overwhelming dread. This isn't just a guy in a mask. This is a force of nature coming to reclaim what he thinks is his.
It's cool how he mixes the familiar with the unfamiliar. You still have the mask, the music, but everything feels heightened, more visceral, more disturbing.
That's what makes his version so effective. He takes what we think we know and twists it, subverts it, makes us see it in a new light. It's both terrifying and thought-provoking.
Speaking of thought-provoking, we have to talk about Laurie Strode. Zombie makes some big changes to her character, the biggest one being that she's Michael's sister.
Right. That's a huge twist. It adds so much complexity to the story. It's not just a random girl being stalked. It's about family, about the bonds that connect us, even in the face of unimaginable horror.
It brings up those questions about the nature of evil, too. Are Laurie and Michael both predisposed to darkness because of their shared blood? Or does Laurie's normal life prove that environment matters more?
Zombie doesn't give us a clear answer, but he makes us grapple with it. We see these two characters linked by blood, but shaped by completely different experiences. You have to wonder if Laurie could have become another Michael if she'd gone through the same things.
It adds that layer of fatalism, the idea that some destinies are unavoidable, that no matter how hard you try to outrun your past, it'll catch up to you.
It's chilling. And it speaks to the power of Zombie's vision. He takes this familiar story and infuses it with psychological depth. He explores trauma abuse, the cyclical nature of violence, and it creates this film that's both terrifying and profoundly unsettling.
Yeah, it definitely stays with you, makes you think. Now, what about Zombie's take on Dr. Loomis? He's pretty different from the original, too, right?
Yeah, he's definitely not the same Loomis. He's more flawed, more vulnerable. And his relationship with Michael is way more complex.
In Carpenter's film, Loomis is like this voice of reason. He understands Michael's evil, but Zombie's Loomis. He's trying to help Michael. He sees him as a patient, a human being, even though he knows how dangerous he is.
It adds this tragic element to the story. Because Loomis genuinely cares about Michael. He wants to save him. But he also knows deep down that he can't. And that's heartbreaking, especially when you see how Michael manipulates Loomis, how he uses that empathy against him.
Yeah, there's that scene where Michael escapes from the institution, and Loomis is just devastated. You can see the defeat in his eyes. He knows what's coming.
It's like he's lost faith in his ability to help. And in a way, he's lost faith in humanity itself. That's a really powerful performance by Malcolm McDowell. He brings so much depth and complexity to the role.
So Zombie takes these iconic characters, Loomis, Michael Myers, and gives them these rich backstories, these complex motivations. It's a bold move.
And it pays off because it elevates the film beyond just a slasher flick. It becomes this exploration of human nature, of good versus evil, of the things that break us and the choices we make in the face of trauma.
And all of that wrapped up in this raw, gritty, unflinching style. It's a lot to take in.
But that's what makes it so compelling. Zombie forces us to confront the darkness, not just in Michael Myers, but in ourselves. And that's what makes it a true horror classic.
And with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the themes, the characters, the style. But there's one last piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. The ending, Zombie goes in a very different direction than the original, and it's definitely sparked some debate.
Oh yeah, that ending. It's a gut punch, and it leaves you with a lot to think about. But we'll save that discussion for the next part. After a quick break, we'll unpack the ending and explore its implications. And we'll talk about the film's legacy, how it's influenced the horror genre, and what it says about our fascination with the dark side of humanity.
You know, it's amazing how this film gets you thinking about the nature of evil. Is it something we're born with, or is it something that happens to us? You know, like what makes a monster?
It's the question, isn't it? Philosophers, psychologists, everybody's been trying to figure that out for centuries.
Yeah.
And Zombie's film doesn't give us easy answers. Instead, he gives us this character, Michael, and forces us to look at the roots of that darkness.
Like he's saying, okay, here's a monster, now try to understand him.
Right. And by trying to understand Michael, we end up confronting some uncomfortable stuff about ourselves.
Yeah.
The film makes you think about that potential for violence that's in all of us, the darkness that's lurking beneath the surface.
It's not just about scaring us, it's about making us think, challenging our ideas about good and evil.
Absolutely. Rob Zombie's Halloween, it pushed the boundaries of horror, paved the way for a whole new ways of films that were more psychological, more interested in what makes people tick.
He really opened the door to this more introspective kind of horror, one that isn't afraid to ask the tough questions about where violence comes from and how people become monsters.
And that influence is huge. You can see it in so many modern horror films, that gritty style, the willingness to go deep into the darkness of human nature. It all goes back to Zombies Halloween in a lot of ways.
So we've talked about the themes, the style, the impact, but what about how people reacted to it? What did audiences and critics think of this bold new take on Halloween?
Well, it's a big hit at the box office. Made a ton of money. Critically, though, it was more mixed. Some people loved it, praised it for being bold, psychological, taking risks. Others felt like it went too far, lost the suspense and atmosphere of the original, and just went for shock value and violence.
Yeah, I remember those reviews. Some people thought it was too much, too exploitative.
And that's fair. Zombie style isn't for everyone. It's raw, it's unflinching, it can be pretty disturbing.
But even the people who didn't like the violence, they recognized that he was trying to do something different, trying to bring something new to the Halloween franchise.
Right, he wasn't just remaking it, he was reimagining it. He wanted to make something that would get people talking and that would stick with them. Yeah. And he definitely succeeded.
People are still talking about this film, arguing about it, analyzing it. It's got staying power.
That's the power of the film. It gets under your skin, Makes you confront those fears and those ideas we have about good and evil. It makes you think critically about the world and the darkness that's out there.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rob Zombie's Halloween, I'm left with this one question. Do you think understanding the roots of violence, what makes someone a monster, makes us more afraid or less afraid?
Wow, that's a tough one.
Hmm.
I don't think there's a right answer. But it's a question that Zombies film forces us to ask ourselves. And maybe by struggling with that question, by trying to understand that darkness in ourselves and others, maybe we can find a way to make the world a little more empathetic.
That's a great point. Something to think about for sure. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the dark side of Rob Zombie's Halloween. It's been a wild ride.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.